Hi, we've arrived at part 9 of our study into the book of Job. This is our penultimate episode. We will have 10 in total as a way of a recap and looking further. In part 8, what we did was we looked at Job and his final arguments, his final claims of innocence before God, that he was the innocent victim of all that had happened and all that had gone on. And we got to the end of that session and the defense rested. Now we come to chapter 32, and this is when Elihu speaks. He came late to the gathering. We don't know when he'd arrived. Chances are, I would say, that he probably arrived during that period, the 7 days where they sat together, Job and his 3 friends, and they were silent. It probably arrived in that period. But he came late, and he'd been listening to the arguments and listening to the discussions. Up to this point, the last couple of times back and forth between Job and Zophar and Bildad, you found that the guys were just talking past each other. They weren't talking to each other, they were talking past each other. One would make a comment and the other one wouldn't even respond, and that was just getting to that point. So then Job gave his last defense. The defense rested and there was silence, and then Elihu spoke. Elihu took his moment to vent his frustration. It actually says in chapter 32 there, in the first 6 verses, I think it says 4 times, it says that that his wrath was kindled, that it was his wrath that caused him to speak. He was aggravated, he was antagonized by what he heard. The arguments were going round in circles. He was listening to them speak. Now, he had left probably to the end to speak because he was probably the youngest member there, and he'd give deference to the older members, to the older speakers, allowing them to have their place and to give their opinions first, which was just right. You let a bit of respect to seniors is very much something that they would have done in those days, to hear their wisdom. But Elihu comes along, and as a younger person, he challenges the norms. He pushes the envelopes. He's not happy with looking at things merely in the way that people had always looked at things. He wanted to go beyond that. He wanted to push the boundaries. Well, why do we believe that? That just because we've always believed it doesn't mean it's true. And it's good whenever young people do that. They cause us to reconsider things that are entrenched. Sometimes they cause us to articulate probably what we believe better, to make it understandable, to pass it on to another generation, and even to throw out things that are false beliefs or false dichotomies and things like that there. And they challenge those norms, so they can bring about a very good beneficial point of view to an argument or discussion sometimes. So Elihu here speaks. He'd given them all their chance to speak, and now he opens his mouth. Now he emphasizes right off the bat, he emphasizes his spiritual heritage, from the meaning of his name to the relationship with his family and Job's. He's a blood blood relative, I should say, of Job's. So he's coming from a slightly different point of view than the other gentlemen, the other comforters. They were all friends, business associates, whereas this guy is actually a member of Job's family, albeit a distant member, but he's still a member of his family. And he comes along, and he says in chapter 33, verse 32, he highlights that his desire is to see Job walk rightly before God. He comes different. He might have started off with wrath, and there's maybe a holy wrath and a righteous wrath, but his desire is to see Job walking rightly before God. It's an honorable sort of notion. It's an honorable for him to believe that and say that. Again, as I said, he apologizes for his youthfulness and for his inexperience. He says, but he contradicts the perceived truth that wisdom comes from years and experiences. Rather, it comes from the Spirit. Now, maybe he's hearkening back here a little bit to what Job had said. Remember his conversation about wisdom and about manly wisdom or earthly wisdom and godly wisdom. Maybe Job was hinting at that godly wisdom was unobtainable, and it was something that only God could have, and we could never have it. We could strive for it, but we'll never get it. Well, Elihu is drawing on wisdom again, and he's maybe drawing that connection. Well, no, my wisdom is actually from the Spirit, and I'm understanding things a bit better because of the Spirit, not because of the years that I've lived or the experiences I've had. So he's changing a slight bit of a perspective here. There, again, in this whole conversation, in this dialogue between all these 4 or 5 men, there's an expansion to the normal way of perceiving things, an expansion to the way they understand things. And Elihu is pushing the envelope here. He agrees with Job and his vision of wisdom from God, but he's connecting it a bit more to his own experience and his own understanding. Elihu defends God. He provides, proving the greatness and majesty of God. God is greater than man, according to Elihu in chapter 32, verse 12. His perspective is greater than Job's other friends. He goes to great lengths to expound upon God's justice, God's greatness and his might, and even lists some of God's attributes. He's pushing the boundaries out there. He's trying to get that bigger perspective on things. It's actually a precursor in many ways to what's about to happen whenever God speaks. It goes a long way to developing Job's understanding of the nature of suffering and the nature of this world. Incidentally, Elihu is one of the only friends of Job's, one of the only people who spoke, who God did not chastise. So there's things that Elihu says and highlights which God approves of, or at least God doesn't condemn. So it's worth a read, chapter 32 to 37. Then we come to chapter 38, and God speaks. Wow, now we've arrived. This is it. God has now answered. You can see the scene, can't you? The courtroom where they're standing and Job has been giving his case for how he's an innocent man, and his friends have been saying, well, there's sin in your life, there's something has gone wrong, how they've gone back and forward, this reward for goodness and this retribution for badness, and how they've argued back and forth, and all this time the judge has sat in silence and listened. Because God was there, he was listening all along, and we find that out very quickly. But God comes along. The word for God used most often in the book of Job is the name Elohim. Elohim is the name for God in the book of Job. This is also the 4th word in the entire Bible. In the book of Genesis it says, in the beginning God, Bereshith Berach Elohim. In the beginning God. This is the most comprehensive and the most encompassing name for God that we have. In the name Elohim, we have such a wealth of information. Everything that we can conceive of God is contained in the name Elohim. It is plurality in unity. It speaks of God in creation, in judgment, in deliverance, and in punishment of evil. It is a huge name of God. It encompasses all of his attributes and all of who he is. And it's fascinating to see how he starts. Now Job is going to hear from the judge of all the earth, and God speaks. And I'll just read the verses here. Job 38, verses 1 to 3. And it says, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. He challenges him right off the bat. It's like, Job, you've sat here and you've gone on about how innocent you are and how much suffering you're going through, and it's a verbal slap in the face, really. God's shaking him, saying, now stand up like a man. These terrible things have happened to you, but come on, think about this. Eugene Peterson actually puts it this way. He says, why do you confuse the issue? Paraphrasing the same verses. Why do you confuse the issue? Why do you talk without knowing what you're talking about? Pull yourself together, Job. Up on your feet, stand tall. I have some questions for you, and I want some straight answers. So we can get that way sometimes, can't we? whenever we're going through things, that our world is reduced to that pain and to that suffering. It's like whenever you get a scalp under your skin, that everything, all the rest of your body being in harmony and being at peace is forgotten about. As you worry about that scalp under your skin, as you start to work at it, suddenly this wee scalp under your skin becomes the biggest thing in the world to you and the most pressing thing to get out. Not that Job's experience was as small as a scalp, but he had made his experience, reduced everything down to what he had suffered. And God's saying to him here, Job, time to stop. Time to shake yourself. Stand up like a man. These things have been bad, but come on, stand up like a man. Let's think about these things. Let's think about the big picture here. He then goes on, God goes on then to ask him over 70 questions about who God is, challenging him about God in creation and all that he has created and the natural order of the world. It's like a litany of charges, a litany of things he's asking him. I mean, I only to read a few. He says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched out the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstones? He's challenging him. Come on, think about these things. You're worried about these other things. Let's think about how big God is for a moment. Let's stop amidst all this suffering, amidst all the pain, amidst all this self-introspection and examination. Let's get our eyes off what I am experiencing and on to how big God is. That's what God's challenging him to do. He's just stirring him up. Let's think about these things. See, God wanted Job to understand that there was a big picture and that our finite minds can only grasp the edges of it, get a hint of it. It's worth a read. Chapters 38 and 39. God emphasizes his majesty, his power, his wisdom, his creative abilities. And it goes into such depth and such intricacies about all of creation. And you sit there and you read it and you go, wow. You can't read it and think, my God's a small God. My God's an insignificant God. My God is a minor God. Not at all. When you read chapter 38 and 39, you come away thinking, wow, what an awesome God we serve. What a mighty God. Truly, we are looking at Elohim, the God of all creation. Bereshith, Berach Elohim, in the beginning God. It's a challenge, and he's challenging Job to think outside of the box, to think of the bigger picture, to think about what his experience is. After God's talking to him in chapter 40, verse 3, Job then answers the Lord and said, behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice I will proceed no further. The fear of the Lord has come upon him. That reverence before Almighty God. He now feels like nothing. You can almost hear Peter in Luke 5 whenever he was in the boat and whenever Christ told them to cast their nets over to the other side of the boat, and they took in a great haul of fish. And it says when they came to shore that Peter fell down at Christ's feet and he said, depart from me, for I am a sinful man. You can hear the echoes of it here in Job. He's aware of how insignificant he is and how his claims about God's justice and who God is really was reducing God down and making less of God. But God starts off by reminding Job about how big he is, how awesome he is, how powerful he is. And God goes on. His process of expanding Job's mind. He goes on there in verses 68 and on into the next chapter. And he says there, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you and you shall answer me. Would you indeed annul my judgment? Would you condemn me that you may be justified? He repeats again what he had said in chapter 38. Now stand here, stand up like a man and answer me. And he challenges Job on what he said. He's challenging him on his opinions and what he's voiced. See, what Job had done, because Job was so entrenched in his beliefs of reward and retribution, of reward for goodness and retribution for badness, because he was so entrenched in that understanding and he hadn't shifted from it, he had really painted a picture, given God two options. And he'd said basically either A, God is right and Job is guilty. That might be a possibility. But then he'd gone to such extraordinary lengths to proclaim his innocence. If I had a fair judge, then my case would be heard and I'd be found innocent. So the other option is Job was innocent and God was wrong. See, he created that dilemma, that that unnecessary either-or scenario. He had created that image where either God does this or God does that. Mind you of a few other things in Scripture where people have gone for an either-or option. So here Job he's saying to Job, Job, you're making me unfair, you're making me unjust in order to make yourself holy and yourself righteous and yourself innocent. You're accusing me of doing wrong. And that's what he was doing really with his arguments. When you think about it, he was saying, if I had a fair judge, I am an innocent man. Therefore, I am innocent and God is guilty. It wasn't a good way to present things. It wasn't a good way to think about things. It wasn't a good way to think about God. But God presents a third option. And that's really what the third option is, what the book is about. God was right and in the right, and Job was innocent. There's no doubt about it. God never did anything. God didn't take anything away. He merely lifted his hedge of protection and gave the enemy permission. But he didn't actually do anything. Job didn't do anything evil. Didn't do anything sinful. Maybe he was on borderline here, and that's why God intervenes to save him from overstepping. But both of them were walking right and doing the right thing. So God then directly is here challenging Job's understanding of suffering and the nature of suffering. And I think it's important that we sort of grasp that as well and understand that ourselves. As we've said a few times now, that the nature of suffering, the reason for suffering isn't what this book's all about. Why did he suffer? Well, we know it was either natural or it was the enemy. Things happen. But don't blame God. Bad things happen no matter where in the world or what you're doing. And it's better sometimes to fall on the rock than have the rock fall on you. Job has been humbled. He's been reminded of the greatness of God, the majesty of God, the awesome power of God. He's been humbled now. He's no longer elevating himself as self-righteous. Now he's realizing God is awesome. God is mighty. Elohim governs all of the creation and organizes and orchestrates it all. And that was part 9. In part 10, what we'll do is we'll have a summary. We'll have a finishing comments about how God unfolds the consequences. And then we'll go a wee bit further and we'll look at some of the spiritual significances of it. And I hope you'll join me next time as we finish this series. All right. God bless.